So
This
I'll leave it
conference
until
will now be
7:30
recorded.
or half past the hour exactly. So about 2 minutes time, we'll make a start. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. By my online clock, it's half past the hour here in Melbourne. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on which part of the world you're in, and welcome all. Apologies to our South and Central American colleagues for the hour. It's a very Asian-friendly hour for us, so I'm sure we'll revert another time. Just before we start, some housekeeping announcements briefly. Please mute yourself if you haven't already done so, to prevent background noise and prevent the presentations cutting in and out. Also, there's a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, actually the opposite side of the screen, where you can leave your questions, and we'll look at those and bring those to light after the presentations. They'll also be there for Tina and the team in Geneva to use and apply afterwards. So very important that we share our experiences and thoughts, and I'm certainly going to be looking at those very keenly as we go. The conference is being recorded, so if you don't want that, please switch off your cameras if that's an issue for everybody. We'd encourage you, however, to switch your cameras on. I mean, this is an amazing feeling to be talking in real time to the various parts of the world, and we really need to make the most of our global network through the IOE. And both the recording and the slides will be shared after the meeting with everybody. So let us now, let's start our IOE digital conference on fostering skills and productivity during the COVID-19 crisis. I'd like to go to the IOE team in a second, but I might just share a personal note. I mean, this is just an amazing time we're living through, and it's one where in Australia we've been very struck by just the awful impact of this, the human impact in all countries, but a number of countries worse than ours, but also the time for business leadership, the time for our networks to provide ideas, to lead recovery, to support the businesses we represent is very striking. So we're doing a number of things here to really keep businesses in business and people in jobs. And it's a time we're really feeling the responsibilities of our role a lot. And I'm sure that's probably common for colleagues right around the world. So thank you to the IOE team led by Roberto for giving me the opportunity to chair today's important conference. The chair of the IOE's working group on employment and skills, my CEO, James Pearson, also sends his warmest regard. There are many questions we can ask on, or matters we can address on skills and productivity. I mean, we're looking at things like the challenges managers face in maintaining productivity levels during the crisis. And we can certainly say in our country, with so many people working from their homes, with changes to infrastructure and supply, whether it's still possible to maintain the same levels of productivity. And probably the question I'd add there is the role of productivity in springing out of this crisis in due course. into a competitive world, into a world in which our countries maintain or continue the trajectory of their living standards? How can the private sector maintain competitiveness while addressing the health and financial and societal and community implications of this crisis? What lessons should we be learning from each other in areas such as skills, reskilling, and ways to promote learning cultures at work? What are the roles of our organisations as business organisations and companies assisting their members and clients? And I think I alluded earlier to my organisation having a very practical role, working with government to get money for employers and welfare, and that's not always possible in every country, but it's an important role where it is. But also, we're starting to think about our policy role in facilitating recovery and the like. So these are the types of things we're going to address today to provide participants with concrete ideas, perhaps recommendations, but certainly some ideas to get you thinking, particularly in this area of skills and employability as we go. And you'll have opportunities to ask questions and to share experiences across the next 85 minutes or so. Before I give the floor to the invited speakers, the three, and to your questions, I'd like, however, to ask Roberto Suarez Santos, the Secretary General of the IOE, to introduce our meeting and to say a few words. Roberto.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you to all of you for joining. As you rightly said, this is not the first digital conference that we are organizing. It's already the 8th or the 9th digital conference. As you know, IOE, as many of you, have to change in a very quick manner its focus, its approach. Nobody would have foreseen already 3 months ago, 2 months ago, what's going to come to us. All of a sudden, we have become digital. No CEO of any company, not even a global leader or a government, would have been able to push the digital agenda so hard. Unfortunately, in a very difficult emergency situation, we are talking about devastating consequences. That's the wording that we are using from a social and economic perspective. We want to look to the future as IOE. What we are aiming at is to help our members and to help our companies to overcome this situation with practical guidance, which help for a quick recovery, especially in critical sectors. And that's basically what we are now dedicated to. So as you probably have been able to witness, we have a dedicated platform in our website where we put together all the material that you share with us in terms of measures taken by your governments, measures taken by yourself as business and employees organization. And Scott, by the way, I want to thank ACCI for the good guidance that you provided us. I mean, that has been very helpful also for other federations around the world. Secondly, what we are also doing is to focus on specific themes of areas where we can be of help: telework, economic advocacy, and we use this word from you, Scott, in the first digital exchange that we had, and we are now producing an outcome based on that. Employment measures that need to be flexible, quick, and efficient, and also the element related, of course, to health and safety. And we have been working with the World Health Organization, among others. But one of them also has to do with global supply chains, and we have also the opportunity to have with us WTO because of also the very worrying circumstances of trade right now, and also the forecast for trade decline in the coming weeks, which is also quite scary. Just to stress two elements of this crisis. One of them is the fact, and we keep saying that is both a global and supply chain crisis. I mean, the lockdown affects individuals who cannot spend and even who cannot receive incomes in many cases, but also the lockdown affects companies producing and companies production, meaning they cannot produce as they used to. So that is a consequence of a health issue, which has also strong implications on the economy. For IOE and for its members, priority, of course, is health and livelihoods and lives of people, and that's also something that we have to bear in consideration. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices, but having as a top priority health. I wanted also to tell you that we are also looking to this crisis from the angle of sustainability of companies. And that's a concept that we have been working closely with the ILO in the past years, but it's more pertinent than ever. We will never have jobs back if we do not have a better environment for business to operate. And that's what leaders need to take into consideration. And that's an area where we need to work, especially for the small and medium companies, and also for the informal economy in many countries. Secondly, it's time to partnership. It's time to do better in terms of private-public partnership. What we see now is many companies already putting all its efforts in a kind of altruist manner to support health systems, but also to support citizens, to support individuals. This is the idea, this idea of joining efforts also with the trade union, but also with the stakeholders, means that also we have to give up many of our differences to now come together. In the face of this uncertainty that we are facing, okay? So it's an uncertain time, but the way to succeed is quick recovery, but also joining efforts, which is not easy. By the way, we are now in strong conversations with the unions also precisely on supply chains, and I can assure you that we have been spending the entire weekend to find a way also to help suppliers, but also brands in the garment sector to have the liquidity that they need, but also the middle term basis for a recovery. So the element that we wanted to emphasize now is skills, because now it seems like other debates and other discussions, but also other actions that we were having in this year, and this is the centenary of IOE, were a little bit forgotten. And one of them is the debate on skills and productivity. In these critical times, skills gaps are increasing because there is no mobility, and we had yesterday an exchange precisely on mobility. Qualified people and not so qualified people are missing for critical sector, for essential services. And also when you think about recovery, the use of digital tools could be more important than ever. The existence of a learning culture within companies, within your organization, will be much more crucial to have jobs back. They need to anticipate the skills to be back competitive, because there is not such a thing as coming back to normal. What we will be coming back is to a new normality. And this new normality, remember, we were discussing the disruption of the new technologies, and that the idea of anticipating skills will become more pertinent than ever in order to produce new types of products and services. The need also, and remember, this is the debate that we had last year, and we were going to produce an important outcome with one of our partners, Deloitte, and I am glad that they are also participating here with us, on social and human skills. Social and human skills will make much easier transitions from one job to the other, and which will be much more critical to strengthen employability. So all these elements are the ones that we need to identify now for action, because these exchanges for us are not just exchanges, it's exchanges that will help us to provide you guidance and to act on policy and to act implementing this policy. That's all I wanted to say, and thank you for the time allocated to me. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And on behalf of my organisation, but I'm sure a number of people on the call, there's never been a more important time for us to be together as a network and to have the IOE operating on our behalf at the global level. We thought 2020 was going to be a party for the 100th anniversary, but actually what we're doing is we're seeing the relevance of our global network and its importance underlined by your actions on our behalf. So keep up the good work, as you say, in the supply chains, in the various areas of effort, but also these are invaluable opportunities for members to get together. Now, we have 4 presentations of 10 minutes each. I'm going to be relatively strict with time for each of the speakers, just to make sure we've got lots of time for questions at the end. So we have Bhavna from CII, Sam from ACTEMP, Miriam from Deloitte, and Nazarene from the GAN to finish up. So without further ado, I think Bhavna will ask you to make your presentation, and we're all looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Hi, so good afternoon from India. As we speak, we've entered our phase 2 of lockdown. Phase 1 ended today. The good news is that April 20th onwards, we do start opening up industries in bits and pieces. And that is something that the CII has helped put together and given in as policy recommendations. But before we move on, just quickly, the role. So the lockdown started for India on March 22nd. And before that, we had, as CII, which is an industry body, already issued advisories and also advice to the government on how industry should continue to function and what are some of the health measures and other measures that they can take. So the message, actually, what I wanted to say was that CII constantly has been pushing for the fact that yes, health is important and is the most important critical factor, but at the same time, India as a country largely driven by MSMEs and daily wage laborers, we should not forget that this could be the biggest impact. Tina, can I have the next slide? Once the lockdown started, we also felt that how do you constantly maintain the learning and skills capacity of the organization and the workforce? And largely because a lot of the organizations have been forced into the whole digital view of work and mode of working as we move forward. What we did was collated inputs from various organizations and sent them out as best practices to our other member organizations. Some of these are highlighted in the next few slides. Tina, next. So we've been again and again focusing on the fact that COVID is actually an opportunity and a medium and a way to learn and focus towards lifelong learning. Having said that, we are focusing totally on learning as a continuous process. But yes, we're moving into digital education and training. And also, so all the schools in India have started operating through digital means. And now we're also saying that organizations itself have moved into massive online courses, whether it's with partners or whether it's on their own and through the internal learning management systems. Next, Tina. Some of, and I'm giving you specific examples, Hewlett Packard, Rudra Sheikh Enterprises, Accenture in India, in fact, has done a lot of onboarding of their new employees through the digital means. The good news, of course, means that hiring continues to happen at some level. Though overall, we see a dip, immediate dip of about 25% layoffs when it comes to the workforce. But there are certain sectors which continue to hire even in these difficult times. And I'm not just talking about essential services. I'm talking about software, IT, technology, etc. Even tourism and hospitality has given a work from home, leave without pay for the next 3 months to 6 months, but we don't see it completely stopping. Next. Then organizations which were traditional organizations have now moved into digital platforms. So these were the ones who actually believed in completely online training, in classroom training, but now have moved into online training as well as effective engagement solutions with their customers. So we see a lot of sales of online sales solutions, etc. happening. Energy, Vertiv Energy is another example. E-learning modules have been done. And because these are also, especially a lot of training for the essential services happening around COVID-19. CI itself, along with GE Healthcare, has launched a training program for doctors and nurses across the country, which are very COVID specific. Next. This is a little crowded slide, but what we wanted to talk about was that some of the things that CI has focused on, and we continue to focus on when we say that industry must start. And these are some of the preventive measures that we are recommending to the government as well. That so, for example, canteens and cafeterias should be shut in organizations, and 2-meter distance between employees, but let them continue. No meeting rooms, but digital meetings to continue, but let work start and resume. Next. CII, the role that we have undertaken is we've actually set up a fund for the micro and small medium enterprises, and that is for rehabilitation of the organization. So we're looking at industry health and organization health over here. We've given in some policies to the government. We've also helped create a cadre of volunteers through the private sector, which will be available for the government once the lockdown is removed. And that is expected around 3rd of May. As you all may know, the incidence of coronavirus in India is still very, very, very controlled. We are just at about 12,000 cases because of the severe lockdown. But we do understand that it must open up very quickly if the virus also has to take its normal course and industry has to start going back. Yeah, next, Tina. These are some of the webinars that we have organized. Now, this is a very specific training on COVID, but we are continuing to organize skilling, and this is CI itself is continuing to organize skilling around generic areas. So this, so one of the topics, for example, we have launched is Edward de Bono's creative thinking, because we think that that would be one of the critical factors of survival for an employee in the next few years. And the next slide actually talks, I just cut and pasted as the internal online training platform, and what are the kind of training programs that are available day before yesterday. I think I sent this out yesterday, so day before yesterday. So as you see, and this is all across India. So you have Bangalore, which is south. There's a business transformation training. These are all online webinars. In Pune and the western part of India, we have facilitators on productivity management, on valuation of enterprise. So the message we're saying is these are the critical things to actually last longer in the market and reinvent yourself. And things must continue, and we must learn to reinvent. So training is going on as usual. I'm happy to answer many more questions. There's a lot of things happening. Of course, India is dealing largely with the migrant problem, but I'll be happy to take any questions later on.
Excellent. Thank you, Bhavna. I understand we're going to take the questions as a group at the end when all of the presentations have come in. That was exceptionally interesting with those themes about continuation, but also renewing and building on what we already know about electronic learning, new ways of delivering and reaching your members. I just remind everybody that we have got the chat function. So please do note your questions as you go, or matters you'd like the speakers to address or you'd like to address as we go through. So the second, Bhavna, really appreciate your expedition as well. That helps me keep us to time. Sam from ACTEMP is the next of the speakers. And Sam, as I indicated, yeah, about 10 minutes or so at the most. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott, and good morning, colleagues. I'm really happy to be here today as we reflect on this very important topic. So just for the sake of time, I'll go directly to the presentation. Elodie, can you go to the first page? Next, Elodie. Yeah, so we know and we understand the effect or the impact of COVID-19 had no historical precedence. And the ILO just launched it, I think, about 5-6 days ago. It's estimate that about 195 million full-time jobs would be lost. This graph on the right side is from the US. It's about the unemployment rate. So this was already obsolete because this graph shows historical an outlier with 6 million people claiming unemployment insurance. But of course, this was it's already obsolete because there were about additional 15 million people who asked for unemployment benefits. So the extent of the unemployment rate in the US alone is currently about 22 million. So that's just amazing. You can see it on the graph. So basically, business closures, stock market crisis. So the simple issue is we all understand there's no historical parallel to this. Next, LOD. And of course, then based on this, there are a number of scenarios about what the world would look like after the coronavirus pandemic. So a number of evaluations and impacts and discussions are currently taking place. Foreign time, a number of newses and prominent thinkers are currently pondering and reflecting on this topic. But the key message that is coming across is, well, colossal crises are often followed by deep, permanent, and multidimensional social and economic shifts. And I think we expect the world to be completely different once we exit out of this COVID-19. So in my reflection, what I am looking at is how would the world be different and what does this mean for business? Elodie, next page. So at the wake of the crisis, then society could be different, and it may look like a pandemic conscious, which would then have impacts on attitudes and behaviors in the way consumers behave, in the way consumption patterns are made, or the way we order our products, where we hang out. Are we going to go to restaurants as often as we do? Are we going to travel as often as we do? We may, but we'll be pandemic conscious. There's also a emphasis and refocused emphasis on resilience. This is about societal resilience, but also business resilience, and it might induce changes in the way businesses are structured, in the way we run our businesses, and there will be less trust in the invisibility of humanity, but also governments. I think this will induce changes in the way we relate with governments, the meaning of government and governance, and even the profile will be looking into our leaders. I think this would change. So when the relationship with governments and the way we perceive governments change, obviously the rules of the game would change and businesses would have to adopt. So whatever we discuss, whether on skills or productivity, would have to take that into account. But again, the most radical change, as we had heard earlier, Bhavna just showed us, Roberto and Scott also mentioned it in their introduction, is that society will become emphatically digital. And we have already seen this trend. This is not a new thing, but I think there will be a renewed emphasis as life will shift. Even normal life will start to shift more and more digital. This would have great repercussions in the way businesses are organized and businesses conducted. Next slide, Elodie, please. So as a result, we will expect huge shifts in social interactions. This will change, behavioral changes, attitudinal changes, but also social culture will shift. But more importantly, for businesses, there will be changes in purchasing and consumption behavior. How do people will consume? Whether it is services, whether it is goods that they would be buying, people will be more digital in the way they purchase. But also, I think people might be a little bit build up their saving, because that's part of societal resilience. People will start storing things which they wouldn't normally do. So that means there's going to be a little bit of shift in both in the behavior of consumption, but also in the pattern of consumption. The way we relate with governments, as we said, even the very concept of government will change. And resilience will become a new business currency. So in addition to productivity and competitiveness, businesses would be looking forward in terms of how do I build my resilience? What are some of the key elements of resilience? So this will become important questions. The work arrangements will change. Telecommuting and other flexibilities will become more and more an integral part of society and the workplace. So again, businesses will have to process this. Next slide. And then the big question would be then, what do these changes mean for businesses? I think this would be a big question which every businessman in every sector will be pondering about and grappling with. So productivity, competitiveness, growth, and resilience would then be intertwined. So we cannot, we will not be able, or we cannot afford to look at this four things separately. Next slide. Then there are two related questions which are relevant as we reflect now how to build up business resiliences. So the first one is, what type of enterprises demonstrated better resilience, flexibility, and innovation? So I think this is the aspect of learning from the experience. So each company, each enterprise would go through some form of introspection to see whether its business model, the business model it has, is one that would be favorable if a similar pandemic, more or less of in magnitude, would happen again. What would change? And the second issue to look at would be then if resilience is important, then what are the factors that are important to building resilience? The business ecosystem, Roberto earlier mentioned it. The business environment is critical if we have to exit out of the crisis. But more importantly also, the business environment is critical if businesses are to build and become resilient. So what kind of business environments would be important? What kind of business models and organizational setups and leadership systems would be also important for flexibility, innovation, but also resilience? I think these are issues that would become more and more prominent. Next slide. So in short, what we're saying is the rules of the game would change as the game changes. So when society becomes emphatically digital, work relationships change, so then enterprises would also change the way they operate, and that would put a stronger emphasis on the skills, and the type of skills they would be looking for could also change. Next slide, Elodie. So here, then the point is, the issue of the skills will be reformulated, not just in terms of productivity, in my view, but also in terms of how to build up resilience looking forward. But that's going to bring us back to the same topic we've been talking about, but in a different context and with a renewed emphasis. Soft skills, I think. Soft skills would be the currency once again. It is about, because if clients are digital, suppliers are digital, if global supply chains are also to be restructured because of the need to building resilience, then how do you really communicate with people who are more digital? People who could very easily switch to other clients if they are disappointed. How do you negotiate? So negotiation skills, communication skills, trust building skills, more so when it is done through distance. Team working skills with increasing flexibility in the workplace and telecommuting and so on. How do you manage teams? Because traditional concepts of workplace relationship and concepts of team management would become obsolete. And what kind of learning cultures would you build? So this becomes increasingly important. But again, when the notion of supervision changes, because it's not going to be supervision at the workplace, but it's going to be more of supervision from distance, and you'll be looking in terms of skills to people who are self-motivated, are able to set their own priorities, understand goals, and work from distance, yet still understand that they have a common objective to achieve. So these are the kind of demands that would be, I think, put as we go forward. It will be seen from resilience perspective, but I think the demand for soft skills will be even more stronger. The demand for lifelong learning will be even more stronger. So in my view, the agenda for skills will not change, but might be re-emphasized, but the modality could change. So that's what I would think would happen. Thank you very much.
Sam, that's fantastically interesting. And before I respond to what you've said briefly, before in introducing the next speaker, I think it's also worth everybody reflecting that we've got both the IOE and ACTEMP in our corner during this time. And Sam, I've been in some correspondence with Deborah about how critically we see your role in tracking the impact of this crisis on our organisations as businesses. So employers' organisations, their capacity to ride out this crisis, the changing demands upon us, the smart innovations some of our colleagues are making and sharing those globally will be absolutely critical. So looking at what you were saying, and just to prompt some questions as we go, I mean, this role of skills in resilience, restoration and change is really a critical theme. So the IOE's been really ahead of the curve, I think, in prosecuting the emphasis on skills with the ILO and trying to change the emphasis of that organisation. And then we see so quickly, now we get to this crisis and we see that the importance being brought to bear and the IOE being proved correct, because this change in skills, or the importance of skills in a changing world we come out into, and our country's making the most of those in everybody's interest, will rely on their skills. It'll rely on skills and adaptability to change to what we need to do. So I think there's a number of quite interesting themes there for us to pick up as we go. And I might just, if I can have one gratuitous comment, I might sort of make the observation that labour standards written 70 or 80 years ago for the circumstances of those times don't strike me as remarkably adaptable to the times we'll find ourselves in, but that's a whole another set of battles for us to fight.
Yeah.
Can I introduce our third speaker, Miriam Denk from Deloitte, will join us now for 10 or so minutes or so, although we're going quite well with time, I think, in how we're going. So Miriam, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Mim. I'm talking to you week 5 in total lockdown, not having left my house somewhere in Spain. Thank you for having the opportunity to talk to you today. I know this is the busy slide, but I think what I really want to look at is helping around looking at skills and productivity, really related to how do we prepare as employers, as employees, as leaders for the new normal. And by on purpose looking at an angle from a leadership perspective and also from an employee's perspective. And the way that we look at the crisis currently in supporting our clients is along the lines of respond, recover, and thrive, which is what you see in the middle here. It's really responding is related to preparing and managing the current life that we have, which is very different, whether this is from how we organize our organization, manage our workforce and the safety of our workforce, and also the interaction with our customers. Recover is really, which you've mentioned all before, is what do we learn and basically emerge even stronger based on that. And the thriving part really is preparing for this, the next new normal, and what do we take out of this and come out potentially and hopefully even stronger. Starting on the top, what I'd like to show here is what we are looking at from a respond, recover, and thrive perspective is 6 crisis priorities that we see leaders really having to look at. Number 1 being really putting in place, which all of the clients, at least I'm interacting with, have put a command center in place. And one of the key learnings is, many organizations have a business continuity plan in place and a disaster recovery plan and whatever they are all called, but none of that actually really helped any of us, to be honest. So the new thing that we are calling out basically is a command center, is a task force, the command center that really looks across workforce, supply chain, and a number of other things. The second one is they're really understanding workforce and strategy from a health perspective, mental health perspective, cash perspective, etc. The third one is business continuity and financing, because ultimately cash is king in these times, even more than before. One word that we hear everywhere is obviously liquidity. How do we keep managing our cost while potentially less is coming in? That's obviously every employer's worry. Customer engagement, which obviously depending on your business is very different, but particularly if you cannot engage directly anymore, what other channels do you find? And how do you interact with them? Do you leave them alone, or do you care even more? And definitely, which was mentioned before, digital capabilities, which is a huge thing across crisis. And the kind of things is even, it's not even how do we make people who weren't too comfortable using Zoom or SharePoint and other things. It's the bandwidth issues that we've all had in the beginning, that we couldn't even join these kind of meetings because we couldn't hear or see, because we just technically couldn't manage. So these are the priorities to look at. But way more important is what we see a lot and successfully, because I really want to share something tangible here, is what does that mean from a skills perspective, from a leadership point of view? And the first one is you need to design by heart, but also by head. And what is really important here is that leaders must be driven, particularly now, where employees fall super back to basics of the Maslow pyramid, which is caring for family, health, safety, and somehow making enough money to look after ourselves and the families. And basically, what are you as an employer doing for me? And here, it's very important to consistently show empathy, and that through also personal experience, how you care for your beloved ones, how you make decisions first and foremost on family. That's important, the compassion as well, but also making sure the head is switched on at the same time. And here, what must come through is that it's sincere, that you basically talk compassionately, but that you also, at the same time, in order to make that happen, stay honest and transparent from a head perspective on what do we need to do, what's important from a financing perspective, liquidity, etc. So that's super important here. Putting mission first. One of the things that I think we've all had to walk through the last 4 to 5 weeks, and will continue to do so, is as a leader, how do I really triage and how do I prioritize? That's one of the key skills now, and quietly connected with speed over elegance. But what's important here is, even if you don't have all of your facts in place, and it's not all perfect, but you must make sure what is the mission, what are we trying to achieve, alongside with the purpose, and be quick in prioritizing and triaging to make the right call, and to also stop things and explain people why. The context is a different one now, securing our workforce, securing our consumers. With that in mind, basically being quick in triaging priorities. And that's actually not too comfortable for many, but that's something that each and every leader of us, we need to learn quickly. Speed over elegance. Yes, you got to be decisive, and you need to be courageous. Also definitely new skills, or not new skills, but being applied differently now. You may not have all the facts at base. It may not be all in place as quickly as you want, but you still need to make calls, which also may mean making calls at a time when you don't know it all. Just to give you a tangible example, which is for us in-house, we have been doing scenario planning. If X percentage of revenue is gonna fall away over this and this time period, with the biggest, for us, what is our North Star is not having to reduce any of our employees in the Swiss market, just honestly speaking here. So with that thinking, and with scenario planning, basically being quick in deciding, okay, bonuses will be paid out later, these and these things will not be paid, these and these things are going to be taken off our balance sheet. And we do not have all the facts yet, but we are planning to do this. And maybe if in 4 months' time these things haven't come through, maybe we will be acting differently. Nevertheless, this is the plan for now. The next thing here, and oh, can you see my slide still? Here we go. Sorry for that, coming back up. Good. This one here is really around the transparency of communicating. I think what's super important here, own the narrative, is of leaders to really size it. How big and how honest do you want to be? To be as transparent as possible. And we have seen this internally, but also with clients, where leaders are really being honest enough and courageous enough to be transparent of the challenges that we as a business have, but really making it as a we conversation, how we all contribute on serving our customers and serving our employees, and how we all can do our thing. That's important, connecting it to purpose. So here the key from a skill perspective is being courageous to be transparent, also stating what we don't know yet. You gotta trust that people in these times are really listening carefully and are rather valuing the transparency and not being made a fool of, and actually feeling that you care for them, and even stating the things that you don't know. That's in these times way more important from all the feedback we've been hearing. But still at the same time, it's not all dark age. Thankfully, we also see a lot of opportunities, and what we have done as an organization, CS, we're obviously looking to China being a few months ahead. How did this impact you? What does that mean? How do you get out of this? And basically really learning quickly from the experience in China, and based on that, and really listening to the market, what we hear from clients and also ourselves. All of a sudden, we're away from internal focus when we're in successful and times where we seem to be able to focus a lot internally. It's really back to customers. What is going on in the market, listening carefully what they need, and really swapping the perspective. And it's important to do that listening and caring in order to paint a compelling picture to your employees. That's part of number 5. And which leads to embracing the long view. Yes, there is a need to really be critical and doing the operations and all of this now to manage the crisis, but not to forget, it's very important to still carve out time in order to plan for the longer term. Focus on the horizon. So that's the 5 parts. So similar to what Sam said, I don't think there are too many new skills, but all of a sudden they had to be switched on and people really needed to apply them. And that really is a difference. And from what we are seeing now is the learning is so much quicker thanks to that. You know, these discussions, do we allow people to work remotely? Well, we've now all proven we can, and everyone is learning on their own pace. Important here around this is, and I do get to that now in the bottom, but it's also to ask for help. For example, when it comes to remote work, and we've looked at from a China example, where it was around organizations with mainly office workers. Obviously, remote working 90% plus was switched on quickly. But we've had examples where people, organizations, huge organizations, couldn't even make that happen because they didn't have the hardware. So go and ask your ecosystem. For example, Deloitte, we loaned hundreds of laptops that we had in our basement to clients, because that's how they help the workforce to actually be allowed to work from home. Go out and ask. People are now more than ever open to actually help. So that's one thing. And another one on the manufacturing, the one thing that I saw questions earlier, at least in the respond perspective, was, of course, we can't make this remote, but then how much safety can you put at place so that people still show up? We had a lot of clients who shared, at least within Switzerland, for example, people simply didn't show up at work, no show, because they were afraid, because you need to put measures in place to really look after your employees. On an employee basis in the bottom, when we look at recover, we really look at reflecting what have we learned, how can we reconnect, or is this a chance to reconnect, and what learnings from a behavior perspective have we made? Re-engage, rethink, and reboot. And here, just on the left-hand side, a few skills that I personally experienced, that I've been hearing from clients and interacting. These are the kind of soft skills that I see on the thrive now, really making the make or break in current times, which is really being inclusive, having the courage to speak up, to actually directly, because we can't see each other, we need to pick up the phone all the time, or we misunderstand things, and we need to have the courage to address it directly. There is no time. We should be focusing on the business. There is no time to have challenges between people keep happening. So we need to have the courage to address this quickly. We have to let go of things that we care for so much, because it's not going to be like this anymore. We need to just try new things. I mean, the kind of innovation that we are seeing out there. I saw, for example, one consumer company in Germany. How do you welcome a new employee on day one if you don't come to an office together? So the new boss simply picked up the hardware and dropped it in front of the employee's house, and they had a conversation window to street. Those kind of things. Just do it. I feel there is now a sense of entrepreneurism coming out, even in big and small organizations, where people are being given the trust to just try new things, because it's now more important than ever, because you may even come up with new business or product ideas. Caring is now more important than ever. Show your clients that you look after them. It's not about the money. It's about, are you okay? Are you healthy? How can I help you? Fast decision making, as before, Sam spoke definitely about the resilience part. And that's an important one, because we see in the public and safety space, resilience, there a lot of people are psychologically very impacted. And obviously we see that from China. We've heard week 3 and 4 productivity drops. People are really at stretch in having to work from home, not being allowed to do things. All of a sudden our rights are at risk. So these are the things from a skills perspective, and also to continue productivity, that are very important from an employee-based perspective. And on the right-hand side, just a few ideas, obviously, on how to support that. You know, you need to really show up for your people and customers. And I know in the first week, as business people, we kept talking about it's going to slow down. I'm working more than ever. I trust you all do, because we're thinking through of caring even more for employees and customers. So this is, you need to set the tone at the top. If you say this is now more important than ever, you need to demonstrate this on a daily basis. You have to have scenarios in place to have a plan. That's what currently people see in governments. When they feel there is a plan and not one day to the other things are shifting, they believe it and actually follow. You got to create strategies for temporary labor reductions and things like this, unfortunately, but it needs to be planned. You have to have a task force in place, and you need to engage and over-engage and communicate with your employees. That's what we currently see all over the place. And that is a skill that currently many are learning.
Miriam, it's Scott. We're just wondering whether you're finishing up.
Yeah, I'm done.
Look, that is fantastic. That was really interesting and really resonated with me on a number of the things that we're experiencing in Australia. The word that I wrote in my margins as you were speaking was integrity. The integrity of your measures and following through on your promises and your intentions. And one of the things we've experienced, and we'll need to bring this back to skills, but a lot of our employers have spoken to their employees about being in it together. I don't know whether I can save the business. I don't know whether I can save your jobs, but you know, we're in this together. We're trying our hardest. We're changing what we do. To talk about skills, one of the things that struck me listening to you is the importance of delivering on your promises to employees about investing in them and their future employability. And that's going to become even more important than ever. So what we might do, we might pivot quickly to the fourth of the presentation, so we've got good time for questions. That is Nazarene from the GAN. And we've got some good questions coming through, so keep them coming. They're at a nice manageable level for me so far, so I'm happy with that. But do keep asking your questions as you go, because obviously we've got some really interesting thinkers from some fairly different experiences and some experiences across borders by the sound of them as well. Nazarene, over to you.
Thanks, Scott, and good day to everyone. Greetings from Geneva. I think perhaps my first statement is to say that the GAN comes out of a crisis. In fact, the foundations of the GAN lay in the end of the last financial crisis. And as everyone has said in so many discussions, why waste a good crisis? And I think the work of the IOE and our partners has really emphasized the approach in terms of collaboration, a solutions-oriented approach. I think notwithstanding the challenges as the GAN, we think that this is the opportune time to focus on skilling in as many ways as we can. Elodie, if we can move to the next slide. Many of you know the GAN members, leading industries. I think the one thing that unites everyone at the moment is everyone is feeling the strain. If we move to the next slide, you'll see that the GAN has our networks across the world. And there's not one region that has been immune to the effects of this virus. I heard yesterday that Antarctica remains the only continent to not have a case. So it simply shows that we all have to deal with the situation, we all have to be innovative, and we have to find ways to ensure that we work with our local partners, we work with our global partners. As much as COVID is a global issue, the solutions really have to come from a locally driven partnerships, solutions that we can take and ensure align to our local context. I think that's the one issue we're picking up across our discussions. Once again, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It has to be tailored to our local needs, to our local services, and how we can deliver within the infrastructure available. Elodie, the next slide, please. And I think at the heart of it is really this focus on workforce development. The work of the GAN is around sustainable workforce development, creating long-term relevant labor market opportunities, pathways into the labor market, and promoting and advocating for the uptake of work-based learning, because we think that this is where the best learning can happen to supplement academic learning. What we have seen is that the nature of the workplace has shifted. For the last 2 years, a lot of our work has been preparing us for the future of work. Well, the future of work has arrived, probably in a way that we never anticipated, but we're certainly having to be innovative. We're having to respond to the idea of teleworking, of mobile workforces. If I take the situation in Geneva at the moment, we will go back as Swiss employees on the 26th of April, 27th of April. Tina and other colleagues who live in our surrounding neighborhoods in France are on lockdown until the 11th of May. So it will still not be business as normal when the Swiss economy reopens. It doesn't mean that people living in France are going to be less productive. In fact, my team members who live in France, as Miriam said, are more productive than ever, because we're having to find ways to ensure we retain our connections, that we're constantly in touch with one another, and that we're learning and sharing on a daily basis. I think it's probably the best chance that we have to demonstrate what a new normal could look like, and what this evolving future of work may look like in practice. We're having a real live dry run. Elodie, the next slide, please. And I think what we're seeing is that there are massive shifts at the moment. We know there are massive shifts. But while work has stopped for some people, for other sectors in the economy, the work has been more emphasized. And we know that from our healthcare sector, who is right at the front line of this. Our essential services, which range from everything to the healthcare sector to our water and sanitation services, are at the forefront of this. Our pharmaceutical sector is now probably the most watched sector in the world to ensure that we have some kind of solution, a medical solution. But we're also seeing that our engineering services, construction, plumbing, Farooq asked a question around the manufacturing sector. I think we're starting to see so many innovations out of the manufacturing sector where the manufacturing sector is helping the healthcare sector find solutions. There were some really interesting insights coming out of Italy, for example, where 3D printing was used to supplement the lack of ventilators in hospitals. So we can see that there are sectors that are looking at this from really solutions-driven ways. There are some sectors that are really stuck. There was a question, and Scott, I apologize, I'm looking at the questions as we're chatting, but a colleague from South Africa asked about the beauty sector. What does this mean to the beauty sector? Well, all of us who've been stuck at home for the last month can tell you that the day the restrictions are lifted in almost every country, I think hairdressers and barbers are going to be overrun with customers. But it will mean a new normal. What does it mean for hygiene? There will be an increased level of hygiene in the sector. The social distancing will have to be enforced. How do you bring in new technologies around sanitation within these organizations, within mainly SMEs? Because really, this is a sector that is probably 99% run by small business owners. How do they sustain their business post-COVID? And will they even survive the restrictions in most countries? At the same time, we're seeing that while in the main face-to-face training has stopped, we've seen that there are some countries that are looking to support long-term training programs such as apprenticeships. We've seen in Australia, France, the Swiss government has put in place measures to protect stipends, for example, for apprentices. But we also know that in those industries that are at the front line, there's a much greater training opportunity and a work-based learning opportunity that is now second to none, because you're learning on the job. We've seen so many countries take doctors who in their final year, they've stopped the exams, they've put them into work, because what better place to learn than in a crisis like this? And I think Miriam spoke about a shift in onboarding processes. It's exactly this issue where medical services are sending in students into the front line. There isn't time for hand-holding. You're being thrown into the deep end, and it's an opportunity to apply your knowledge that you've gained over the last few years within a theoretical learning space. At the same time, we know that there are several sectors that are most hit by this. Tourism, hospitality, we're seeing the automotive sector is bleeding in terms of sales. Many plants have stopped the manufacturing process, but even more so in the informal and SME sectors. We know that the issue around informality means that the participants in that sector don't necessarily have the same social protections. We know that business owners are challenged in the SME sector in terms of accessing government funding. How do they manage that? So we're seeing that training in most of these sectors has come to a halt. Even where digital programs may be in place, not much learning is taking place. And I think the downside of COVID is that we are amplifying and widening existing gaps. And I think our challenge when we come back into what the new normal will be business leadership driving how to cut those gaps, how to close those gaps. A lot of the work, for example, around the gender dimension has possibly gone back a few steps. The next slide, please, Elodie. We know that there are multiple skilling opportunities. We're seeing the shifts in apprenticeship training. We're seeing the digital process. We're seeing a new interconnectedness where even systems like WebEx and Zoom and GoTo are crashing because of the volume in terms of logons. But I think the big issue, and Sam, you spoke about you spoke about a deemed permanent multidimensional shift. And this move to something emphatically digital. The GAN is looking to see how we ensure that when we have this digital shift, we still don't leave people behind, because we know that digital access is so uneven. Even the B20, G20 process has a workforce on digitalization, and it assumes that this is global. But we know that infrastructure, basic infrastructure, such as electricity supply, is not consistent. And if we can't start with fixing that, how do we ensure that those who are already marginalized are not left out even further? Elodie, the last slide, please. And I think what we're seeing, and Farooq is talking about necessity is the mother of invention. Absolutely, we're seeing that social partners are playing such an important role. This issue of dialogue, but action that has to follow is so important. And for me, my big takeaway from this has been how strongly and positively and quickly governments have responded, that we can enact policy in a matter of days and weeks, and we can implement that policy if only we can continue in that mode post-COVID. We do need a whole of society approach. It cannot be simply top down. We need the empathy from leaders. We need the cooperation from all of us to ensure that we work together, to ensure that the workforce remains developed, that we have the linkages to the labor market. Scott, you made a comment in, I think, the IOE's very first webinar a few weeks ago, where you said, you know, how many jobs will not be needed anymore? How many employers will realize they can do without certain categories of the workforce? Well, it's our responsibility to make sure that even if we do away with these categories, that there are other pathways and there are other career opportunities that we allow people to move into. We've seen the innovation from employers. We've seen the innovation from the learning sector. We need to harness that and we need to grow that. We need to make sure that skills development remains part of the bigger policy agenda. The African Union has a really interesting approach where skills was embedded in Agenda 2063, sorry. And Agenda 2063 is a 50-year plan that is meant to look past the 2030 SDG deadline. And that's a really long-term sustainable outlook. And if we can make sure that the skills approach sits at the heart of the policy agenda, we can build on our work-based learning, our skilling approaches beyond this disruption. And I think now is the best time ever to ensure that we develop these adaptable skills within our workforce. All of us at home have suddenly become specialists in online conferencing. We didn't really do this 6 weeks ago. We're testing, we're learning. We need to make sure that we can take those lessons into all segments of the workforce, whether it's frontline, blue collar, white collar. And as I said when I started, the future of work that we've been planning for is here and now. And I think we just have to continue with our innovations. So as difficult and challenging as COVID is, I think it's brought out the best in a lot of countries, policymakers, business leaders. We're seeing that strong leadership and mentorship drive that we need to build and grow on. And I think as partners in this space, we know that we can overcome. So thank you very much.
It's a fantastic place to finish the speakers, Nazreen, with that exhortation on the importance of skills. And I think that linked to the importance of skilling various generations, because it's not just young people, it's older people that can suffer most in some dimensions from these sorts of crises. But the importance of skills and keeping our businesses in business and contributing to our communities will be integral to recovery, but a recovery which is the best possible contribution to our communities, to social cohesion and integrity, and to recovering the place in the world as we go on. We've got 5 or 6 questions. Nazreen has fantastically assisted me by addressing a couple of them, which is great. I'm just going to briefly take the indulgence of the chair just to tell a very brief 2 experiences from Australia, which I think are both positive and negative. So I'll start with the positive. Our international student industry, where we have people come from all around the world to study in Australia, can't occur. Now, our government stepped in and guaranteed the funding to that industry. The relevance of that is that money which has been given to our universities is going to be used to provide cut-price training to people currently resident in Australia. So we've got an opportunity to significantly increase the discretionary learning and professional skills across our community. The bad example is that a lot of our apprentices were the first laid off in enterprises. So we were already having some problems in our apprenticeship system, and we've seen the youngest and least attached to the enterprise be amongst those who are laid off first. So that underlines the sorts of challenges we have. Now, we have a set of questions. I'm going to take them in this order. Firstly, I think we'll take Michelle's, and then one of the really serious matters raised by Farouk, and then we'll see where we are. So I'm going to read the question or encapsulate it, and then perhaps put it to our speakers to respond. Gayatri from India, you've got a couple of quite India-specific questions, and I think we'll take one of those, but I think it would be useful for you to perhaps make contact with Bhavna directly on at least some of the things you're asking, because there'd be some really good domestic answers for you. But let's start with Michelle's question about a change to increase digitisation having a long-term impact on international workforce mobility. I think that's a really fascinating question, because in one respect, we're going to have more generic skills that allow us to work in more countries. But then this conference is a fascinating example that we actually don't need to be jumping in planes. We don't necessarily need to be working over borders. And there's so much more we can achieve in different locations. But do any of our 4 speakers want to speak to Michelle's question briefly?
Scott, can you repeat the question? I'm trying to find it, but I couldn't find the question itself. Could you repeat it, please? Yes.
Michelle Knief has asked, do you foresee a change to increase digitisation having a long-term impact on international workforce mobility? And Sam, perhaps you can pick that up and provide any thoughts.
Yeah, I'll try to reflect on that very briefly. I think obviously, yes, digitalization will continue. It's going to expand. There's more receptibility towards digitalization. But again, most importantly, I think we see a shift in terms of the scope of what is permissible digitally, what is possible digitally. I think a number of social interactions are possible, trainings are possible. We have, one of the things we did during this crisis is we pushed the limit of what is possible socially. You know, we can now hang out socially. You know, you can have a drink. We have, so the ACTEMP team meets every Friday evening for what we call the digital drink. So we talk for an hour and a half, we entertain ourselves. So I think it's possible in many ways. So this is one issue to keep in mind. So that means, yes, the scope of digitization increases. So it might decrease the reason, or it might decrease the, you know, a little bit slow down mobility or unnecessary mobility. Let me put it in that way. There's going to be a shift in terms of, you know, the normal question today that we have is if somebody asks you for a meeting, even in the office or when you live in the same city, the question is, oh, why can't we meet in person? Now the question is reverted. It's like, oh, why can't we meet online? So unless there is a good reason to meet in person, there's going to be a preference to actually meet online. So there has to be justifiable reason to meet otherwise. There's already that perception, you know, kicking in. It's a new perception. But of course,
perversely enough, Sam, I was going to say that I find that fascinating, because I think I know more about people personally because I see their homes and how they dress, and people see my cat. You know, perversely enough, I feel I know more about people and I've made a better connection with them. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the kind of change that's happening. It's just a mindset shift, which is also pushing then the scope of what is doable, what's possible, what is permissible digitally. And I think so as a result of that, so if you bring that to the labor market, we're going to start to see a decline in terms of short-term mobility, in terms of, you know, you stay somewhere to share experiences and so on. So that kind of mobility might be declining. But on the other hand side, I think society will be more connected. There will be more seriousness in terms of, for example, society will become more serious, more favorable towards multilateralism that I would expect. There will be global connectivity with less mobility. But again, that seriousness, we're not gonna be, I don't think society will be stupid enough once again, you know, to vote in reality TV stars. I think we're gonna start voting in people who are smarter, better able, founded on evidences rather than sentiments. All that will change the way we're going to function, including the way globalization will work, including the way multilateralism will start to work, and all of this will have impact on mobility. So the short answer that I have, is I took a long detour, would be I would expect short-term mobilities to decline, people moving around for conferences, for meetings, and so on. But if you see it in the long term, there will be more acceptability for serious kinds of mobility, like especially in certain sectors, the demand for people with expertise in IT, in communication technology, people with the right kinds of soft skills will be needed elsewhere. There's going to be increased mobility because of that. So I would expect. So it's going to be the type of mobility will decline. The profile of people who will be moving around will be different. But I don't think the overall mobility will decline. There's going to be a slowdown and maybe a sinking in that. But at recovery, I think there will be more mobility, but a different kind of mobility. Thanks.
There's lots there, and that's really interesting. Does anybody else want to answer this question, or should I move to the next one, perhaps? What I might do, I might move to the next one, and then people can have a think and come back to this. But I want to pick up, I think, a very important point that Farouk's essentially made in a couple of his interventions in what's online here. And that is, of course, that not all countries are the same. So we've been talking a lot about digital opportunities, about highly developed countries with IT systems that allow this type of communication to all corners. But Farouk's made the point that there is still a huge proportion of the world's working population who do factory-based work, or what we assume is work that is inalienably in its location, in the location of the employer. And Farouk's made the point, or really asked the question, well, what are the implications for skills in those sectors or for those sectors? So is there a divide coming? Is it a divide that was already there that we've put an emphasis on? And I guess the constructive version of the question is, what can we be saying about skilling in those sectors? What can we be learning from this crisis? So that's the question I want to put to the four speakers we've still got speaking at this point. Miriam, from the people you've worked with, or Bhavna, have you got any perspectives on this?
So, Scott, just responding also to the earlier one in terms of international mobility, we see that, India has been sending interns to Japan. We see the demand as robust as ever, because we cater to a specific need, which is the workforce on the ground. And since Japan has an aging population, the workforce is definitely needed. So in fact, we have batches ready to send over there, and we're just waiting for the international flights to resume. So international mobility, yes, to some extent in the Middle East has been impacted, but we do see them going back in another 3 to 6 months, depending on how things shape up in each country. The second part, is there a change? I see that there's a lot of consciousness which has come into the workforce overall. Perhaps it's something that we were taking for granted, where and the expectations from employers was very high in terms of as employees. But there's a certain consciousness about cost. There's a certain consciousness about giving, enhancing your own productivity level and making yourself relevant. I also see that a lot of the employees themselves are moving towards their own upskilling and reskilling. I really see this as a year of now a lot of reskilling and upskilling, not so much of new skilling and new entrance into the workforce. And that's going to be the theme, at least in India, as of now. Now, I would love to get into specifics, but I'd also like to hear what the other speakers have to say here.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Bhavna. Miriam, I was inviting your thoughts in this area as well.
Yeah, the two things we see from a manufacturing perspective is either clients who have significantly more demand and actually are seeking for workforce in very new places. I mean, even in not even related industries where they believe, I help you because you are laying off or you're putting your workforce on hold for now, and we're so much in need, can we make a deal? I help you, and at some point in time you help me back, basically shifting complete badges of workforce basically from one space to the other, which is fantastic to see because it's the mindset, it is possible, and the belief that you can actually train people quickly to do something differently, and where people are because they want to work and they need to work, are willing to learn quickly something new. That's one side that we see, obviously, where the work is continuing, where how the work is being executed from a really a safety and health perspective is obviously different, nevertheless, of course. And the other one is where obviously manufacturing is coming to a halt because the demand decreased significantly. Because there is a connection to, for example, building houses in specific parts. And that cannot happen. Specific parts aren't requested anymore, which obviously from a complete chain of connections to other suppliers, etc., huge impact is what we see. It comes to a halt, and obviously everyone else across the line is being impacted too. Less related to skills at this point in time. It's just a matter of shifting money currently. That's what we see when it comes to that.
I think what will be very interesting.
Really come to struggle. Sorry?
Oh, sorry, Miriam. I think what will be really interesting will be the rapid recovery of the traditional skill system. So there will be change in every business, and there will be change in traditional systems of apprenticeship, on-the-job learning, vocational education and training. They will change, but it'll be very important that they make those areas of instruction make as rapid a transition as the businesses that we represent can make, because we can't afford to have a hidden or a lost generation of young people in particular not enter vocational fields in our countries. And as businesses, we can't afford to have holes in our workforce and in our skill set, and that for a number of countries with an aging population, you will only contribute to that if you've got young people having difficulties leaving school at this time and gaining into skills. So there'll be some remediation necessary, and hopefully the shorter the crisis, the more rapid the recovery. And that interesting listening to Bhavna talk about the rapid recovery in India, which I find amazing given your population, that you're talking about making such a rapid recovery. Our government has a very different approach to holding down this crisis for longer. But it'll be really interesting to see what the recovery is in those systems. If I may exercise my chair's prerogative and go to a question from, I think it's Cheryl, talking about, Cheryl's made the point that private sector training providers are reacting quickly to the changing needs of learners, although I would say probably also to the changing needs of the businesses convening training as well. But she's also asked whether there are examples of how public sector education is adapting with an emphasis on developing countries. I might, Nazarene, ask you whether you have any perspectives on that initially from any intelligence coming through your network.
Thanks, Scott. I knew that was coming to me, but I just want to touch on that previous question. And I think I just want to remind everyone, post the last financial crisis, the demand for skills was increased as soon as the markets recovered. And I think we're going to see a rapid recovery because, one of the issues with factories, especially those in Asia that in the main garment manufacturing, we're making assumptions that consumerism has stopped, which I don't think is the case. Consumers have been forced now not to purchase. Their purchasing power has been restricted by government action. But I think once the markets open, we'll go back to the demand and you'll see increased productivity. On Cheryl's question around the public sector, I do think we're seeing varied responses from the public sector. I think we've been able to see that where strong partnerships are in place between the private sector and public education system, there's a far more responsive agenda in place. There are mechanisms for learning to continue. The issue around digital skilling is improving. We're starting to also see, in the public education system at a schooling level, some countries are far more responsive again than others. In South Africa, we've seen, because of the challenges around access to digital learning, we're seeing television stations, for example, plugging the gap around online learning or distance learning. We're seeing community radio stations being used to deliver learning. So I think there are ways we can do this. We haven't seen it uniformly delivered, because I think also there's been a certain unknown quantity as to when classes, for example, will resume as normal. And each time the dates are pushed out, we're seeing that the public system is going back to the drawing board, rethinking vacation days, looking at different ways to reach out to learners. I think part of the challenge, again, is the access to technology, the hardware and software infrastructure. I think countries have not had to have mitigation strategies around this, so now they're scrambling. I think many larger private sector organizations have sophisticated learning management systems in place. The private education systems are able to respond in a far more meaningful way. I do think that there's been a lot of work that has been done in the relative short term, but Cheryl and I chat regularly, so we'll pick up the conversation around examples, but the short answer is that there's lots more that needs to be done.
Excellent. Does anybody else want to respond to that question about the opportunities for both public sector and private sector training providers, and perhaps some thoughts on how they can contribute to a jobs-rich, enterprise sustainable, rapid and living standards preserving recovery and even improvement for the future?
Hi, Scott. If I may come in.
Yes, please, Sam.
Yeah, just very briefly. I think I see an increasing scope for private and public partnership when it comes to training delivery. In particular, I would see the government playing a major role in terms of creating an enabling environment for private training providers, but also for apprenticeship to prosper. Because I think we can safely expect a major economic restructuring to take place at the wake of this crisis. For example, if I could try to link this with Faraka's question in terms of how the labor-intensive manufacturing industries would be impacted, I think in my view there are two forces that's going to impact this sector and make skills a central aspect of the response from a private sector, but also the public sector perspective. So one is the increasing digitalization, and this includes basically automation and robotization of the workplace. That would be essential, because the cost of keeping labor will now be seen from a pandemic perspective as well. Enterprises that are operating or faring well are those that have a well maintained technology that could function by itself, which is robotization and automation. And we will continue to see this. But I think a second more important factor to keep in mind is there's going to be a shift in terms of supply chains away from global towards regional and local. And again, we don't expect the economy to switch on very quickly. It's going to be progressively. Planes will not start to fly in and massively. It's going to be a gradual recovery. What it means is supply chains will be disrupted, and there's going to be an increased emphasis toward this local and regional sort of supply sources. So I think I would expect a major restructuring to take place in that respect. What it means is then there's going to be massive job losses because of that, because of digitization, because of automation, but also because of the restructuring of the global value chains towards more local. And I think that would then bring the issue of reskilling and upskilling and providing training extremely essential. And this the pressure would be very high on governments, but governments alone cannot deal with this thing. Enterprises need to be a part of that. So I would see a greater role for, as Nazrin said, for private and public partnership in this respect. In particular, the government playing an enabling environment, I think, for private service training providers, but also enterprises to actively engage in addressing some of these problems. Thanks.
No, thank you. And we're very close to the top of the hour. I think we perhaps might start to leave it there. Can I thank Roberto, but also Tina and Elodie at the team and the team at the IOE for creating this opportunity for us to get together. Can I also thank our 4 presenters on everybody's behalf, Bhavna from CII in India, Sam from ACTEMP there in Geneva, Miriam from Deloitte, and Nazreen from the GAN also there. Can I just say 2 final things in conclusion? Firstly, to thank the IOE for their commitment to emphasising and prioritising skills in the work of the ILO, but also globally across the IOE's expanding work. I mean, we see now in this crisis precisely why Roberto and others have invested the energy and authority of our collective employer voice globally in this area. And obviously, we've got a great deal to return to make skills one of the key pillars and foundations for recovery. So, really well done, IOE, in your centenary for being on point going into a crisis that none of us could have foreseen. And finally, can I just say to everybody, stay safe, be well, and our thoughts are with you, your member organisations and your communities during this time. And we're really looking forward to our next opportunity to get together with the IOE and our global family in coming weeks as we continue to confront this and, as others have said, hopefully to an optimistic and a positively changed future when we come out the other side of all this. So thank you again all, and wishing you well with your days and evenings.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you all. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, the IOE and colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye. Thank you.